Welcome back to Rogue Macro. Happy Macro Monday. Some big events over the weekend. Of course, we had Easter, but we had this rescue of this pilot over there in Iran. So I wanted to go over that situation real quick. I do have a military background of 10 years as an air weapons officer, somewhat related to the weapons system officer that was on the F-15, but completely different. I wasn't in a fighter jet. I was in the back of a big heavy aircraft. But did SEER training myself. Was in for 10 years. Did mission planning and all that stuff. So have some connection with the story. And then I want to talk about Marco Rubio and what he has said about NATO. This is becoming more of a talking point. I wrote about this last week about what I think is going to happen with NATO and what I kind of want to happen. Not that it matters or anything. What I think is the smart thing that should happen. And then go over macro charts. Here on Rogue Macro, we go over just a handful of the major charts and we draw the information out of those charts of what is happening and then try to use the macro thesis, the macro theories that I have to come up with predictions and forecasts. So we're going to do that. And then I have a couple other tweets and videos. Of course, put your questions, comments down below, and I will look at any of those as they come up. All right. So what you're seeing right here is, let me share my screen with Telegram. This is just what they're seeing. Roguemacro.substack.com just put out this post. China's rail disaster costs are double revenue. And so I dive into this. It's a free post. You guys can go there and check it out. Yeah, it's a short one. It's like a 1 or 2 minute read. So check that out over there, roguemacro.substack.com. All right, let's get into some of this stuff about the pilot. So I went and I just asked Grok to summarize what happened, and I wanted to go over that. You guys have probably seen tons of videos. I've been posting in Telegram all weekend about this, and it's getting a lot of playtime because, it kind of shows the very difference between U.S. military dominance, U.S. thought process, and the European thought process, our NATO allies. This has been simmering for a couple weeks. Really, it's been simmering going back to the Greenland issue, which should be seen in a new light now that we are seeing all this other stuff happen. But wanted to go over this and then tie it back into the NATO question. So let's go ahead and do that. All right. So I just said, give me the summary of the rescue mission. And on Easter morning, April 5th through the 6th, it was overnight there in Iran. They're about 12 hours difference, maybe a little bit less ahead of U.S., Central or Eastern Standard Time. But the Special Operations Forces involving over 100 personnel, including elements of SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, Air Force Para-Rescue, and the 160th SOAR with MH-6 Little Bird helicopters, C-130s, MC-130 transports, and extensive air, cyber, and ISR support conducted a high-risk combat search and rescue extraction. Now, one thing that I thought of, and probably other people have thought about this too, is how interesting the parallels are here and the things that aren't parallel between behind enemy lines, that situation in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, and having a down pilot there in Serbia behind enemy lines, and this situation. Okay, I just recently rewatched that movie with my son. I thought it would be a cool military movie to watch with him and all that. And so we watched this, and in there you have NATO and other allies. You have this one guy, he's the top coordinator between the American forces and the Allied forces, and he pretty much shuts down any sort of CSAR, the search and rescue operations that they want to do to go get this guy behind enemy lines. And they constantly are fighting the system. They're fighting their allies to get to go and rescue the American pilot. And so, what do we have here? We have a situation where our NATO allies are not with us now, but they're still trying to put a narrative. They're trying to work against us in the sphere of public opinion, international public opinion, working against us to go get our pilot, our American. But they weren't operationally involved. They were not there on the ground with the little, entangling alliances that we have, operational rules of engagement, etc., to stop this operation. And what happened? We put together this massive package of special operations to go get this guy in under 48 hours. And it was pretty incredible. I think I tweeted at a time, or maybe I put it in the Telegram, that this is one of these pivotal points, not just in the Trump presidency, but in the America First, in the new geopolitical order that we're going into. The first one, I think, was Trump. And in Butler, when he stood up with his bloody ear and he said, fight, fight, fight. That was a pivotal defining moment, an upwelling of national pride. This is another one. And yes, for me personally, it is. I felt it. I said, hell yeah, right? But I think in general, this is a rallying cry. Just like the fight, 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 this is exactly the same thing. And it puts the world on notice that the world is different now. I saw reports out there about the UK admitting they couldn't do this and they would have to call on the Americans. I've seen other Europeans say, put out tweets, you wasted all of this for one guy, and they have an image of an A-10 and two C-130s and etc. Of course. It's not just that every life is extremely valuable and has human dignity on its own, and especially your troops' lives. But your troops must know that you have their back. I remember being in every single classified briefing that we got when we were deployed started with the POWs or with the MIA people that were missing in action, where their last whereabouts were, et cetera, et cetera. And so that has a massive effect. And it has a massive effect on the world stage too. Not leaving anyone behind. It's massive. The mission included an improvised desert airstrip. So they went in and overnight they created this airstrip. I don't know how much they actually changed the lay of the land, or if they just picked the flattest airstrip they could. Maybe they had one sort of pass to kind of maybe compact stuff or whatever, but they set up this improvised airstrip overnight, and they landed a couple big heavies over there, unloaded some helicopters, some special forces mini helicopters out there. They're called the Little Birds, and went out and got the guy. Then they couldn't take off with these C-130s. They were stuck in the sand. And so they called in the Air Force Special Forces, and they came in and they rescued. They couldn't fit these helicopters back onto the other ones, and so they ended up having to destroy both the C-130s and the Little Birds. But they got the guy back successful, 0 fatalities. There were a few casualties, being that there were a few injuries. Of course, the down pilot and a couple other people in the firefight, they sustained some injuries, but no fatalities in a massive, massive success. There's so much controversy going on around this. Is this real? Was this a cover up? Was this a cover up for some other operation, like trying to go in and nab some uranium and stuff? I don't think so at all. This perfectly fits with what I would expect from a extremely motivated search and rescue operation for this guy. It developed over a couple days, very, very naturally from my perspective. And so I think this is exactly what happened. Also, you have to put it in light of what's going on, what went on in Venezuela as well with that incredible operation. And now we have this. So that's where I want to put this in relation to everything. The operation has been called one of the most complex in U.S. special operations history due to the terrain, enemy proximity, and risks. Several U.S. aircraft were damaged or destroyed, including some helicopters and transports left behind and blown up to prevent capture. But all personnel were safely recovered. Easter miracle. Details continue to emerge. All right, so that's what we have. I will add in here. Oh, so most complex. I don't think it's the most complex. I wouldn't say that, but it's the most impressive. I would definitely say it's the most impressive that I have heard. And I've heard more than what normal people have heard of. I haven't heard of all of obviously even a fraction of all of the special operations that have been around. But of the publicly known ones that I have been aware of, this is the most impressive. So there could be more complex ones that take months of planning, maybe even years of planning, right? But this one was planned in less than 24 hours and then executed. This complex of an operation, this successful of an operation. So I would have to say this is the most impressive that I've ever heard of. I wouldn't know if I would say most complex. All right, so that's it. Let's go back to, I wanted to tie this in with Marco Rubio's comments. So let's go in here, make sure that I am sharing. Hold on. Hope I'm sharing the audio. Okay, we're going to roll with this, and hopefully I'm sharing the audio. Guys, if you have a comment or a topic, question, comment, concern, put it down below, and I will address it as they come up. All right. So that is us. Let's go into some of these other Marco Rubio videos. I'll do the first one. I think this is chronologically the way they happened. So I'll go down here to this Marco Rubio clip.
And I've been a big supporter of NATO. And one of the reasons why I've been a supporter of NATO is because I believe that these basing rights give us leverage and give us flexibility and operational capability all over the world. But if NATO is just about us defending Europe if they're attacked, but them denying us basing rights when we need them, that's not a very good arrangement. That's a hard one to stay engaged in and say this is good for the United States. So all of them's going to have to be re-examined. All of it's going to have to be re-examined.
All right. So there's talking about NATO and basing. I agree that it's been a good thing for the United States, but really that era is over. Okay, NATO is really over. Are we going to leave NATO? Well, let's go here. See, I wrote about this last week. I believe this was this was a paid post too, but I am going to talk about this. Go to the bottom. So no, this is the wrong one. Let's go back. No, that should be the right one. Why can't I find what I'm looking for here? Oh yeah, I was on the wrong one, wasn't I? Sorry guys, hold on a second. This was a free post from last week. Just going to go down to my conclusion here. So if the U.S. withdraws, what happens? When trying to predict the outcome of the U.S. withdrawal, most analysts focus on Russia. The assumption is that a weakened NATO invites external aggression. That framing is narrow and does not account for the broader deglobalization trend. The more immediate risk is internal for NATO. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, prediction. I prefer the remain and disrupt option over formal withdraw. As the U.S. shapes its path for the coming era, it will not want to leave legacy institutions in place where they can be used against it. So this is in regards to the next Rubio clip that we're about to watch. So if they leave these institutions in place and then they can be used against us. Unilaterally withdrawing from NATO leaves that military and diplomatic structure intact, potentially allowing adversaries to organize within it or expand it in ways that run counter to U.S. interests. It also risks putting the U.S. in a position where foreign policy is indirectly constrained, since it will not allow a full-scale war to break out in Eurasia. So if Europe takes over NATO and then they start expanding it, right, then that's bad for the United States. So it's better to remain and just disrupt everything, disrupt the consensus, disrupt the unanimity of any votes that happen. Same thing in the UN. Stay on the Security Council, disrupt, vote against everything. Don't allow these other players that have anti-American interests to use those institutions that the U.S. set up in the first place and maintained for decades to be used then against the United States. I think that is a very big misstep. So I hope that they don't do that. Okay, let's go back to this and we'll go up and watch a Rubio clip specifically about this.
Out of the triumphalism of the end of the long Cold War, emerged a bipartisan consensus.
What is this music?
And this consensus was that we had reached the end of history, that all of the nations of the world would now become members of the democratic Western-led community, that a foreign policy that served the national interest could now be replaced by one that served the liberal world order, and that all mankind was now destined to abandon national sovereignty and national identity.
What?
And would instead become one human family and citizens of the world. This wasn't just a fantasy. We now know it was a dangerous delusion. Here in America and in many of the advanced economies across the world, an almost religious commitment to free and unfettered trade at the expense of our national economy shrunk the middle class, left the working class in crisis, collapsed our industrial capacity, and has pushed critical supply chains into the hands of adversaries and of rivals. An irrational zeal for maximum freedom of movement of people has resulted in a historic mass migration crisis here in America, but also around the world. It's one that threatens the stability of societies and of governments. Across the West, governments now censor and even prosecute domestic political opponents. Meanwhile, radical jihadists openly march in the streets and sadly drive vehicles into our people. While America far too often continued to prioritize the global order above our core national interest, other nations continue to act the way countries have always acted and always will, in what they perceive to be their best interest. And instead of folding into the post-Cold War global order, they have manipulated to serve their interests at the expense of ours. The post-war global order is not just obsolete, it is now a weapon being used against us. And all this has led to a moment in which we must now confront the single greatest risk of geopolitical instability and of generational global crisis in the lifetime of anyone alive in this room today.
Okay. That was a lot loud music. Sorry about that, guys. So yeah, he's talking about using the post-war global order against us today. Just like what I was saying, if we leave NATO, if we leave the UN, they're going to use these old structures against us. So it's best to remain and disrupt. That was my conclusion last week. If you guys aren't subscribed to Rogue Macro, make sure you go over there and do that. roguemacro.substack.com. Put out a bunch of shorts last week as well. So make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube and even the TikTok. I have been recently putting some videos out on TikTok. So anyways, let's go and continue with next topic up is going to be macro charts. Let me see if there's any conversation going on. Hey, Dex Invictus is back with us. Let's see. How you doing, man? See if there's any comments from Telegram. Not seeing any. All right, let's continue then. Let's go to some charts. Bitcoin up first, 69,700 right now. It did get over 70,000. So that's a good sign. You can see some very positive price movement after this consolidation over the weekend. We are still not out of the woods by any means. If we look at the daily chart, we're still just hovering around on this step in this consolidation. If we put some lines in here, one thing I was pointing out previously, on different writings and stuff, is we have this kind of faux breakout here, and then we went down. Faux breakout back here on January 14th, the beginning of the year, looked really good. We had closed out all of these, positions for the in 2025 expirations for all these different contracts, and it looked like it was going to be very positive, was really heading higher in January. If we can measure like how much it had gone up in January, breaking that previous resistance. Let's see. So here's the first of the year. It went up 11% in the first 2 weeks, and it really looked like it was breaking out, but then it was a faux breakout and it came back down pretty hard. And then I've been comparing this breakout as well. Similar. It's not exactly the same or anything like that, but this whole fake out will be erased, obviously, if we break back above this line and we start going higher. So I do expect Bitcoin to, in the medium to long term, to go higher. I don't know about the short term anymore. It's been a real hard market to call. There is some worry about quantum. I've written about that recently as well. I'm not scared at all about quantum and Bitcoin. There's some stuff about Clarity Act going on, regulatory clarity happening in the U.S. Senate. Will that get passed this week or finalized this week? Whatever, who knows? It's been going on so long, it almost feels like it doesn't matter. We have to have some positive price movement, and I won't believe that anything positive is happening until we break back above this, and we're going towards 80,000. Then I'll start thinking, hey, there's some positive developments here for Bitcoin. But all right, let's go on. Gold. I did post a chart this morning about gold. It had to do with the monthly chart, and if I zoom completely here, you can see this still remains that this overbought condition on the monthly chart is the most overbought it really has ever been. I mean, you have to go back to before they closed the gold window in some technical changes that were happening in the late 60s, or all the way back here into the 40s when they had some movement on the chart that really is just a glitch in the chart back here. So this is the most overbought it has ever been on the monthly chart effectively. And so if that's the case, if that's how we're going to interpret this, this is going to be a major, major top for gold, most likely. Of course, it can go higher, but if it does go higher, it just increases the odds even further that is going to result in a major top that could last for decades and decades. Okay, so that is gold. On the daily chart, it was even for the day, slightly down at the end of last week. Okay, dollar, still struggling with that 100 mark. We have not been able to break cleanly above 100, but we will see if we can do that. It's kind of consolidating here just under 100 or right at 100, and so that makes me think there is more upside potential for the DXY. And I think that is the next move for the dollar. I would be more worried about it getting too strong and harming the global economy than it getting too soft and harming the U.S. economy. All right, U.S. 10-year. Let's see what happened today. I haven't even looked at this today. slightly opened higher, but back down on the day, sitting at 433. Nothing really significant to report on the US 10-year. Everyone's kind of waiting to see what happens, I guess, this week with the Iran deal. This is somewhat concerning, but I am very confident on my oil and energy calls. US oil, this is WTI futures, is sitting at 112, 112.60. Below this wick high back here from the start of the closure of Hormuz back on 9 March. But we'll see. This is, take a look at this. Could be forming somewhat of a bullish divergence here on the daily. Let's go the weekly. I mean, I still stand by that this is not the way that macro markets turn around. We don't just, have a secular bear market and then, oh, they close the Strait of Hormuz and boom, we're in a secular bull market. That's not how it happens. Dex says, just been working my ass off. All right. Yeah, man. Okay. This is UK oil, Brent 109. It is consolidating right at the top. This is the weekly chart, so you can see several weeks here consolidating right at this point. If we go down to the daily, pretty flat. This tells me that there's potential that it can break out higher, but I am thinking that this situation is closer and closer to a resolution. So I'm hoping that happens. Oman oil, that kind of speaks more to this resolution talk because it popped way up here to 170, back down to one teens, and it's been stable there for a while. So there you go with that. All right, how about S&P 500? Positive on the day, big sell-off. Remember, I was talking about this end of quarter bottleneck, the end of Q1 bottleneck, and that does seem to be what has happened here to the stock market. If you go back to Liberation Day last year, if I can squeeze this down, Liberation Day, end of Q1 last year was this bottom, oversold on the RSI, and we recovered. It took us all the way till, let's see, what month is this? To June to get back to all-time highs, but we did that and rounded top coming over. Now it looks like we have an end of Q1 bottleneck again. And for those guys new to my content, the Q1, Q3 bottlenecks are very, very important. That's when you see most of the financial stress in the banking system. You see most of the financial stress in the markets. So we got past it, bottomed, and coming back up. So that is that. All right, let me take a look at any questions, comments. Not seeing anything. All right, so let's go on to a couple other tweets, and then we're just going to wrap it up for this Macro Monday. So let's see if I can find these other ones that I have here. Economic power over 400 years. So we're going to watch this. I've written extensively on this in the past. One of the things that I talk about, or I try to make a point of, is that the way they measured GDP in the past was wrong. All right. A lot of this comes from a guy named Madison, and he went back and they still have this active project where they are still actively estimating past GDP, present GDP comparisons around the world. A lot of think tanks use this data. I think he's the foundation or whatever that does it now is connected with MIT. Think tanks like McKinsey use this data, and they did like the center of economic gravity. If you remember that post, a lot of people talk about that, and they show that it's in Central Asia. Then it went over to Europe, and now it's coming back towards Central Asia because of the rise of China. And China was so dominant in the past, and Asia was so dominant in the past. It's just natural that in the future, the dominance will shift back and we'll get this balance between East and West. Um, I think that's a fantasy. And so we're going to watch this a little bit here and talk about it a little bit more. Let's go back. Okay, so the 1600s, before the Industrial Revolution, we have the Qing Dynasty or King Dynasty and the Mughal Empire. You have France up here, the Sun King, happening around this time. The shogunate in Japan has a big economy, apparently. Then the UK starts coming up in the 18th century, mid 18th century, starting to get some industrialization going there in the UK. Turn that down. But the China is still, way out ahead. And the way that they estimate this is simply by population. Almost entirely. I would say it's 98% population numbers. So if you had 1 million people in your kingdom and 1 million people in the neighboring kingdom, your GDP would be exactly the same because everybody was just a cog in the wheel. It was an agrarian society. Everyone was just a cog in the wheel. But of course, what happened was then the Industrial Revolution came and technology changed the GDP per capita. So in the past, at the beginning of this little video, it has a equal GDP per capita. They change a few things. The 2% that they change is they add a little bit for agricultural efficiency. They even said that China was a little bit more agriculturally efficient. They didn't produce more calories per capita, but they did produce more calories per acre because rice, and they had 2 crops per year when they brought that in. And so they had more calories per acre. And so they gave more of an advantage to the Chinese in this. But that is small potatoes compared to just, as a general rule, it is consistent GDP per capita is how they measured this. So if you have a higher population, you have a higher GDP. My argument is look at the physical record. Is the physical record tell you that we had equal per capita GDP? Did we have the same material wealth per capita in the East and the West? Did we have the same societal output per capita in East and West? No. Anywhere you look, any type of comparison that you want to do, apples to apples, the West is 1,000 years ahead of the East. The one that I found that was just mind blowing. I mean, you can look at philosophy, you can look at uh, engineering, with aqueducts and breakwaters and all that stuff. The one thing that I looked at that I found that was just mind blowing was architecture. Okay. 20 BC, there's a Roman, I think it's Vitruvius or something similar to that. He wrote an entire treatise on architecture, how to build it, what materials to use, how to design, design, principles of beauty, acoustics. It was a complete architectural treatise, even touching on acoustics. And in China, when do you get your first comparable treatise on architecture? You had to go all the way into the 2nd millennium AD, at least the year 1100. Before that, they were just talking about like poetic things like, oh, this is 100 li high. This is round. This is touching the sky and scraping the sky. And, at the exact 800 years earlier, you have people in the West saying, no, you need to build it like this because the acoustics and the way that sound reverberates in this space and the way the sun comes in. And it's just absolutely ridiculous to compare the two. There's no surviving structures before 500 AD in China. No surviving structures. It's absolutely ridiculous to compare these two. So I say the per capita GDP has always been higher in the West, and I would call this the broader West. I would include the Near East, including Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean world. And of course, more recently has been Northern Europe and the United States. But the Western world has always been at least double the GDP per capita, I would say. So all of these different comparisons, economic power from 400 years ago, are really completely garbage. But let's continue. All right, here comes the U.S. There we go. And this plays into the center of humiliation idea. Okay, before the century of humiliation for China, there was another century of humiliation. And before that, the Mongols humiliated them. And this empire, the Qing Empire dynasty, that was a Manchurian dynasty. That wasn't even Chinese. So like it's just a continual history of centuries of humiliation for the Chinese. The only reason why they have built up now is because of the post World War II era, because the US opened up to them, because they got this investment. That's the only reason why they've been able to do this. But the minute you take that away, you're going to see what happens. I just wrote a post just today, this one about the railway. Another free post here on roguemacro.substack.com. China's rail failure. It's still in a multi-year decline, falling 34% of investment, Chinese investment into rail in 2026 alone. Let's see. So it's not just high-speed rail across subways, urban rail, and high-speed rail lines. The operational cost per kilometer is more than 2x revenue. This is just the cost to operate it. That's not even counting the cost to repay the initial investment. It is not even close to breaking even on any of these railways. So when they have a come to Jesus moment about all of this stuff, they're going to realize they overbuilt everything. There's not enough demand, and their whole economic model is broken. It was all built on the US maintaining the global order. And now in the US, obviously something has changed, right? Obviously, now that the US is not going to be backing the global order anymore, it's going to be America first. China's model no longer works. And that's what they're finding out here. Okay, let's go back to that tweet. Okay, so when was that? When did that just swap over? Around the year 1900, okay? So this goes to also all the people that talk about the U.S. is only the world's superpower because of the global reserve currency. When did the United States become the predominant superpower in the world here? Around the year 1900. When did it get the world reserve currency status? Not until World War II. Not until World War II. It was starting to go that way, World War I into the 20s and into the 30s. But really, it was World War II that created the world reserve currency status for the US dollar and Bretton Woods. And that's when it happened. But we already had 50 years of being the dominant economic power in the world by that point. So the US dominance is not predicated on having the global reserve currency. Empirically, it happened 50 years earlier. Okay, 1971 here. This is the gold window. China's coming up. Japan is coming up as well. Germany's still up. This is, remember, after World War II, all of these people had been destroyed. Russia had been destroyed. Soviet Union had been hammered. Japan had been hammered. Germany had been hammered. France had been hammered. The UK kind of survived, but look at where they're way down here. Italy had been hammered. China had been hammered because, well, they are still kind of living in their great leap forward at this point. But you can see the U.S. is the only game in town. And that's probably what we're going back to. And here we have in the 80s into the 90s, Japan is going to peak here about 1990. We have, like, this is a good, Japan would be a good economic ally at this point. They've proven that they have this ability to be a real economic powerhouse. The Soviet Union, maybe we'll get closer to Russia if we start getting less close to NATO. I mean, what happens to NATO if we don't leave, but we have some sort of alliance with Russia? That would be pretty nuts. Look at that, 94, actually, Japan's still going. Oh, there it goes. And there comes China. Okay, and this is where we're at now. Of course, people will say purchasing power parity, China is ahead of us, but that's just ridiculous. This is economic power. You can see what we've done in Iran. You can see what we've done internationally just with tariffs and all that. I mean, we have the premier position. So that's that. All right, let me see if there's any comments, questions. Nope. All right, well, that's going to do it for this one, guys. Check out roguemacro.substack.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at roguemacro and also TikTok and all that. So, all right, guys, thank you. Have a good one.